Well, welcome, Allison.
Thank you.
Welcome, Germaine. These interviews are part of a larger project to develop an archive of oral interviews of people that are connected to the revitalization of Lowell, particularly through the 1970s and 80s, but then how that story has continued to the present. And so we're happy to be here with you today to learn something more about the different programs and entities that have helped bring change to the city. So that is our goal, and we have a list of questions, but we can always deviate as we move along.
Great.
So obviously the Lowell plan was central to the revitalization of the city during that period, played a major role. And we're going to get to that in a minute, but we thought it would be helpful if we started with an introduction. If you could just introduce yourselves. You know, you're the current executive director, correct? And
Yeah.
so Allison, maybe we could start off, and then Germaine, you could share a little of your history.
Sure. So yeah, as you said, I'm the executive director of the Lowell Plan and the LDFC, Lowell Development and Financial Corporation. My background is in city planning. I have a master's in regional planning with a focus on economic and community development. And I say that because, as you mentioned, Lowell looked very different in the 70s and 80s, and I grew up in Lowell at that time. And sort of witnessing that transformation, some of the things that were happening in the city, is what inspired me to pursue a career in planning. So I feel really fortunate that I'm doing that, and in a community that I live and have lived my whole life. I worked in municipal planning for almost 15 years, most of that in Lowell, and was fortunate to join the Lowell Plan team in 2017. And then in 2020, I became the director.
Great. And your predecessor, we should mention,
Yeah.
Jim Cook, wasn't able to be with us today. We're hoping to catch him later. But Jim, you took over from Jim around what time?
In 2020.
In 2020.
Yeah, so he retired in December 19.
And was he one of the founding executive director?
He was the
wasn't.
third.
Germaine.
No,
Okay, let's
actually-
just switch to Germaine.
Yeah, Germaine has all that history. Yeah.
The actual first director of the combined LDFC and the Lowell Plan was Steve Jonkis. There was a director of the Lowell Plan, and I can't remember, because that goes back to like early 1980. It's a woman, I can't think of her name right now, but I'm sure it's in that book. But with the LDFC started actually in 1975, and it was basically all of the bankers. There was no staff until 1982, until Steve. And so basically all the bankers served on the executive committee. They were the ones approving loans. And, once then Steve started, then it was Jim Milonazzo. Then it was Jim Cook. So it kind of...
So it sounds like the LDFC, and if you could explain for our listeners what the LDFC is. So that was the original nonprofit that was founded by the banks, and then the Lowell Plan followed.
Correct.
All right, so let's hear about... Is it still confusing to people?
Yes.
Oh, it is to a lot of people.
Important as it is
You know
to
what?
the
It's the
city.
same staff.
Same staff.
That's same office. So.
But they play two very important functions. So describe LDFC.
Sure. The LDFC, which stands for Lowell Development and Financial Corporation, was actually created through an act of the state legislature back in 1975. And at the time, as we've been saying, how the city looked pretty desperate in the 70s. And basically, we can go back to former Senator Tsongas. Basically, I think he served on the banking commission at the time. So basically, went to the banks and said, we need to do something. We need to. The city, the empty storefronts, and a lot of work needed to be done. So the banks did, basically, they were the initial capitalization of the LDFC. It was kind of somewhat based on their local deposits. So the initial capitalization, I want to say it was like $350,000. It was 9 banks, all the local banks. And then from the very first loan that they did actually was, if anybody remembers, Bonnie's Delicatessen on Middlesex Street. But then it was just basically for fit-up space. But then back in late 70s, early 80s was when the city convinced Dr. Wang to open the headquarters, basically, in Lowell. And because of that, the city actually applied for an urban development action grant and received a $5 million grant to, at the time, was to give to Dr. Wang, but they decided, why don't we lend him the money? Because at that time, the interest rates were in the double digits. Right. So they did lend the money to construct the first tower at
Sorry,
the
this
3%.
is the tower out on Industrial Ave.
Which is now Crosspoint Towers.
Crosspoint Towers.
And so it was at a 3%. And the idea of that would be that then the paybacks could be used than to lend out again. So at the time, the city realized, well, they should not be in the lending business. So the LDFC, where it was already created, had the bankers, had the professional background to do that. They entered into an agreement with the LDFC. And I've told this story a while back when we had the group in from Britain. We still are using those funds. We still have those funds that we use. It was just ended up being a revolving loan, and that's basically, we do commercial loans with those funds now.
It's brilliant.
So really then, in a nutshell, if somebody was listening and they didn't know Lowell, the
Right.
LDFC is primarily helping the city through loans
Right.
that are reasonable to let a business owner
Right?
redevelop their
Exactly.
space.
And since then, there's been a lot of other loan programs. We have a venture fund program, just different things that, whether it's the city or the university, have approached us and said, can we get, and the banks get together and create a loan pool.
Okay.
And we actually, what we basically tell people is that we are not in the business of replacing the bank, but
Right.
working with them and providing funds that, whether it's gap financing or that.
And is it just for businesses, or can it be for other types of residences?
We actually
or-
have a program, down payment assistance program.
Okay.
That we work in collaboration with the Merrimack Valley Housing Partnership. We provide us, down payment, non-interest bearing, and well, we actually just increased it
Right.
to $7,500, which helps with the down payment.
Right. Right.
Because especially with the price of rents and everything, people have a difficult time. So that program has been very successful.
And that one is actually a first-time home buyers.
Yes, first-time home
And we
buyer.
launched a similar
Right, with the
program
university.
a few years ago in collaboration with the university and some of our other large employers
Right.
as a way to incentivize staff,
Right.
to move and live in Lowell. So if you're not necessarily a first-time home buyer, but you're a first-time
Lowell.
Lowell home buyer,
Right.
you can also access some of these funds.
Wow. Okay. I think I actually remember that.
I think
I
Adam,
bought my house.
yeah, Adam approached us.
Yeah.
He was one that approached us
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a good example of how we can be really flexible and nimble to respond to different needs. So
Right.
it was something that we recognized a lot of our top employers were saying we need some additional incentives to encourage people to want to work here. And then we also would love them to live here
Right.
and start their roots here. So, it's something that we can just, kind of respond to kind of needs with our partners.
Right. So maybe just I have a couple questions related to the contemporary, but just to pick up with the history. When you were mentioning that the city, reached out to some of the banks. So just so we know for the record, what were some of the banks? Who were some of the people?
Okay.
And also, was that all volunteer work on their part?
At the beginning, it was, until they hired the first executive director, which was Steve Jonkus. Yes.
Okay.
It's still volunteer work for the banks.
They
It
still
is.
serve on the
They
executive
serve
committee.
on the committee, and
Yes.
that's just a service that they provide, like
Yeah.
joining other boards or
Right.
or
Right.
commissions in the community.
Yeah.
And can you just name, just so we have it on record, some
Sure,
of those early
George
banks
Dun-
and some of the
George-
early
George
early
Duncan,
people?
well, it was an enterprise bank because it wasn't in existence at the time,
Right.
but he was with, would have been either Union National Bank
Right.
at the time, and he was the first chair of the executive committee, Central Savings Bank at the
Yep.
time, Washington Savings, which is still here, Lowell 5. I mean, obviously, the banking world has changed,
Right.
But those were some of the
Some
initial
of their
banks.
initial banks.
Yeah.
That's good to know. And
Yeah.
any entities other than banks at the time?
There
Just
was a
again-
small entity, there was a state center city program.
Yep.
There was a $50,000 money that came to the city, and they used that as part of that initial capitalization as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, Germaine, we jumped right into your knowledge of the history. Can you give us some of your bio? Because we can always organize things
Sure.
with the video,
Sure.
but just so we can explain why you know all of this.
Well, basically my first a real job was working for the city's planning office and working in the auditor's office. So basically, I knew at that time, excuse me, about the UDAG. I mean, I was at the other end of that, actually keeping track of the money that was going to Dr. Wayne, for the construction. And there was a UDAG for the hotel and different ones. And basically, and I suppose I can say this, at the time I was working, Jim Lanazzo had been the director of the planning office at one time. I had worked closely with him. He went to the LDFC to be the executive director, and
Sorry, and when was that?
that was in '84 when Jim Lanazzo went to work for the LDFC. And in 1986 was when his assistant was leaving, and basically said, "Can you come and work here?" And I've
Okay.
been there ever since.
So
that-
you do have the institutional memory then of all the people and the happenings.
things.
Good.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about, you both mentioned in reference to city and when these organizations were formed. Tell us a little bit about what the city was like and why the founders thought this was so important. And maybe now we could talk about LDFC and the Lowell Plan.
Right.
Why was this important to them to found them at that moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we touched about it a little bit, but there was a lot of vacancy in the
Yes,
downtown. Ownership that, was not investing in maintaining their properties. And that wasn't just Lowell. That was, the
Right.
sign of kind of the times for many communities at that time. And there was a recognition that there wasn't enough local investment in our center city in particularly. And in fact, there was essentially redlining that banks were doing and not lending in some of our urban centers because it was so risky. And so the reason that Paul Tsongas, really took the lead in getting banks together in the room and said, look, we know that like for one of you individually, this is too risky to take on. But if collectively we're sharing in that risk, we could actually really have an impact here. And that's why, like as Germaine said, our role was not to replace what a traditional bank can do because they can do that already and they're doing it just fine.
Right.
But by the LDFC engaging, with all of the banks together, we're taking some of that risk off their plate. They're sharing in that together. Restaurants, small retailers, they're very high risk businesses to lend to.
Right.
But by us being there, we can help support them, and it also supports the property owners because then they have occupants.
Right.
The intention is that it's creating a more vibrant downtown. And initially, the LDFC, the focus was just the downtown. Now we're citywide.
Okay.
So we do lend to other projects, throughout the city. Could be large-scale residential, mixed use, industrial. So we, kind of a variety of projects. But at the time, the emphasis was really on the center city and the challenges there.
And then was there an immediate, so as this is happening in the 70s, early 80s, was there evidence very quickly of success? Or were there a couple of businesses or places where you say, haha, this is really working? Or was it a case of having to say, okay, this is taking a little bit of time, but let's stick with it? So historically, how soon did people start to see the results of this?
I don't know.
I think it took some time.
I think it took some time, but
Okay.
also one of the advantages that Lowell had at the time too was the creation of the national park.
Yes.
Okay.
Which happened, and they were able to receive some money from the federal government, and for the same thing to lend because now the mills needed quite a bit of work, and again the national, it was through the Lowell's Historic Preservation Commission, same thing that they were not in the lending business, so where the LDFC actually had the capacity to do that type of work. Entered into an agreement, so there was a lot of lending at low interest rates again. I mean, interest rates at that time were in the double digits. So a 3% loan, a 5% loan was
very
really attractive.
Right.
Right?
So it took time, but
Yeah.
I think because everybody was like rowing in the same direction,
Okay.
and everyone was invested,
Right.
there was a sense of like, this is not going to fail. We're all in this together. We've got to make this work.
Right.
So that's that was sort of the spirit, right, at the time. That was the mindset that everyone had.
And it does feel, and we hear it a lot, that the national park, the establishment of the
Yes.
national park was certainly a milestone for the city. Can you talk about, were there other milestones that happened along the way, or any particular challenges that you remember? I mean, this was not for the faint of heart. We had a gateway city that was definitely economically challenged, as you mentioned. So many gateway cities are still in that state, sadly, and have not been able to find the way that the city of Lowell has, and that's part of what we want to create here is that playbook for how to do that. So what were some of the other milestones? The national park, I mean, do you remember, was that an easy thing to have happen, and the paths were easily cleared and everybody jumped on board? I know we all rode in the same
I
direction.
think we had some
Allison.
connections with Paul
but-
Tsongas, certainly helped.
Yeah.
But one big thing, if I can just go back to the LDFC for a minute, This was, if people remember, what is called now the North Canal Apartments, but for the longest time it was called Cement City.
Oh, right, yes.
Yes.
Describe where that is in
It's
downtown.
actually, would be, what's kind of behind the Civic Center, so it runs on Father Morissette
And Moody.
and Moody.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
very close to the university.
and very
Absolutely,
close to the
yeah.
university and very close to our office now.
Yeah.
And which actually was part of an original urban renewal
Right.
dating back to the 60s, tore all these buildings down and built that. And it actually was in the process of being foreclosed, was taken over by HUD. And at that time, the Coalition for a Better Acre basically, approached us and said, we need to do something. I mean, it housed over 200,
Families.
units, families. And again, they, approached the LDFC and actually created a $15 million loan pool to do the rehabilitation of that. And
Wow.
it was 12 banks at that time.
Wow.
12, some of them were not, local. I remember you had like Bay Bank and, just different banks and created that. And if you look at them now, I mean, the whole
Right.
facade, it was such an improvement. So the people remain living there. And it actually was run by the tenant council as
Yeah,
well.
that's right.
They're the ones that handled, everything. They had their own like board of directors. And so that was a big project. And that was like late 80s, early 90s when
And I
that
think
took
that's
place.
a good example of a really community-driven
Right,
project,
yes.
right? Some of them were driven from the, city leaders, right? Or
Yeah.
state or federal leaders, and
Right.
others like this one were really driven
By
Grassroots.
community,
grassroots,
right?
yeah.
Right.
And then there were, other projects that come to mind were, the sort of acquisition and renovation of the Bon Marché building, which is a signature building in our downtown that now
Right.
houses the community teamwork and the offices for the school department. It's such a large block, right? And so to
Right.
have that in the state that it was in, really poor disrepair. To be able to, acquire and then help restore that, was a big sort of monumental.
And that would also then be a project that you worked with the National Park on, I guess, because
Right.
that's within the boundaries.
Absolutely,
Right,
right. So
Right,
it has
it
to
was-
comply with historic standards and,
Right.
any of the buildings down there would have to, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
There was some funding, I believe, as part of that
Yeah.
from the national parks,
Right.
funds. Yeah.
Maybe this is a place to jump into now also the Lowell plan and how that works in conjunction, or it's like,
Yeah.
as you say, it's housed with it, but how is it different? Like,
Yeah.
what does the Lowell plan allow you to do
Yeah.
versus what the LGFC does?
Yeah, it might be helpful to kind of just explain the
Sure.
distinction
The
between the
yes,
two because
sure.
we
Yeah.
we hear this a lot. People, and even I myself, I had to say, am I wearing my Lowell plan hat right now or my LDFC hat?
Right.
So they are two separate, distinct nonprofits. Separate 501c3s, separate boards. The LDFC, as we've talked about, is essentially a nonprofit lender.
Okay.
That local lending institutions, both banks and credit unions, participate in. There's also some community members that sit on our board and have input into the projects we do. But we essentially serve as a lender.
Okay.
The Lowell Plan is a membership-based organization, and its essential function is serving as a convener of public and private sector stakeholders. At the core of it, that's what we do, is we gather leaders in the community. We meet once a month, sometimes just the executive committee, sometimes the full board. And we have discussions about what is going on in the city from both economic development point of view, educational, cultural, what are some things that are happening in the city, and are there ways in which we as an organization can support the city government itself or the community with various tasks. There's not a lot of programs that we ourselves implement, but rather we fund studies and initiatives that then are used to advance like an economic development goal for the community. So as an example, we've done numerous cultural economy plans for Lowell.
Okay.
3 or 4 over the years. We were the entity that did the most recent master plan for downtown Lowell called the Downtown Evolution Plan.
Okay.
We hired a planner who lived here in Lowell for several months and interviewed stakeholders and really engaged in our downtown, and then helped us draft a plan of what the future of the downtown could look like.
Now, so a project like that, is that something that you do with the city planning department in conjunction with them?
Yeah, I mean, that's important because
Right.
we don't have the capacity to implement the plans.
Right.
So we really need to work with the partners who do.
Right.
And so we then stay engaged in a advocacy role, right, to make sure that there's goals of those plans that are implemented, right. Or it may be, reaching out to other funders and stakeholders who could help implement the actions of those plans. But yeah, we essentially help, draft analyses like that. We actually did also the market analysis for the Hamilton Canal District years ago before they even brought the first master developer in, to kind of get a sense of what would be viable uses here, right. What can the market bear, and what do we want to see here. So we do a lot of those in tandem with the city.
And where does the Lowell plan get its funding?
It's from our contributions of our members, essentially. Okay. We don't look for any funding from the city, because it's important to us that we can still stay neutral. Yes, right. We may not always agree. Right. And so we want to be able to still, reserve that sort of autonomy to act separate from the city. But we would never want to do something that was, in real contrast, because we need to make sure that we are being collaborative and that we're, at the end of the day, it's the best interest of what will move and advance Lowell forward. Right. But yeah, essentially it's our members that contribute to us, that fund our operating expenses. Wow. We did launch an endowment campaign in 2018, and that was a great success. That our members participated in that as well, so that we can have now some funds that we can use specifically for projects, and not dip into kind of operating expenses for that purpose. Right.
So I think, just to follow up on that point, it's been so key, and I've been grateful to be part of the board for the Lowell plan, that part of your history has been to bring in these innovative outside thinkers, architects that have seen other cities that have gone through urban renewal, and I think to open everyone's eyes to other possibilities. And the other thing, I think, is the great marketing campaigns that the Lowell plan took a lead in championing early on. I mean, I'm not sure what the first one. There's a lot to like about Lowell. I think we all remember that one.
Yes, it was.
And we've done a lot of those in collaboration with the university, MCC, the city. So key stakeholders that, again, all, the image of Lowell and marketing Lowell beyond our borders is so critical, not just for us, but for, a lot of other stakeholders.
Right.
It's an example where, the city alone couldn't drive it, the university couldn't drive it, but to have this collaborative group with all member driven, marketing and changing the image is important. So we're all going to participate and be a part of the messaging. Right. That's a great example. Yeah. So, I think to me, one of the other great things the Lowell plan has done is to really encourage the next generation of leaders for the city. And in part of this project is to help people understand this is a very unique collaboration between civic and business leaders that drove the revitalization of Lowell. And, trying to help the next generation to see that when we work collaboratively, as you mentioned, rowing in the same direction for economic well-being as well as social justice and social well-being, that we can make movement. But it's the next generation we're always worried about, so I know Public Matters is a passion for both of you. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's really like our signature program of the Lowell plan. And, as Jackie, you mentioned, it's really about thinking who are the next, this, I know your project is looking at who were those leaders involved in the 70s and 80s, right? And so this is now thinking, well, who will be those next leaders that kind of take on some of these roles? Because Lowell changes and still continues to need those that are going to be just as passionate and supportive of the community. So in 2009, the program was launched in collaboration with the National Park Service. And it's essentially really a deep dive into Lowell's history. It's looking at the transformation that Lowell went through in those early years with the establishment of the National Park and organizations like ours. And then talking about contemporary issues and what's going on in the community, and what are some ways in which collectively people can kind of rally around them and address them. And it's a 6-month program. I think I mentioned that. We take 20 individuals in the community every year. We want a cross-sectoral cohort so that it's representative of the banking community, educational institutions, local government, nonprofit, small business owners. And it's meant to kind of get them in a room together. Hopefully they don't know each other.
Right.
So they're building their own social capital and a network. Because we know that that's really how things get done, right?
Right.
Is
Right.
being able to call on friends and partners to,
Right.
to take on projects. And by bringing different sort of folks from different industry sectors together, you approach problems differently,
Right.
when you're basically based on the industry you're in. And so thinking through how people react to problems, but by learning about how others did, right? And how
Right.
others kind of addressed problems at the time, and then thinking about contemporary ones and how would you tackle these problems. And it's been, wildly successful.
So sorry, this has been since 2009.
Since 2009, yeah. I was actually in the class of 2010.
Okay.
And
here you are.
And here I am.
Successful.
So yes. And it's huge. I mean, it's opened up doors for me. At the time I was working in the community development office at the city, and if I was, stumbled through a project and thought, who could I call on that might be able to help with this? I had a list of names of people that I had just spent 6 months with, really getting to know each other, that you can call on and say, if you can't help me, do you know who could, right? And so it's really that kind of relationship building that's so critical.
Right.
So yeah, we'll be, gathering our sort of cohort for the next year, this fall.
And how does that happen? Do people know about it and apply, or do you actually
Sort of curate it.
curate it?
It's a little bit of both.
or put it in the way of certain
Yeah,
people? Because sometimes people might not know it's there,
Right,
is what I'm
right.
thinking. And
Yeah.
there's got to be a little bit of both, I would
Yep.
imagine.
Yeah, so it is. It's absolutely a little bit of both. We do reach out to our members first and ask them to nominate folks from either their own institutions or that they know of in the community. We ask people to consider, someone that they see as an emerging leader in their organization, someone that is committed already to Lowell,
Right.
and that is likely going to have a future impact on the community. We also rely on our alumni. We have a great, strong network of alumni that still are very engaged in the city, and so we ask them to refer people. And then a lot of people hear about us through word of mouth,
Right.
and we just keep kind of the names running for that, and reach out when the application process is open. This is the time of year that we'll start seeking applications, and then we, like I said, limit it to 20. So
Right.
we want it to be a manageable size
Right.
that also creates an intimacy among the group too. So that's really important to us too, is that it's a
Right.
small size to manage.
Just as a program then, when it started, is this a program that was unique to Lowell, or had the founders of the program heard about it working someplace else? Because
Yeah.
it sounds like a powerful, very successful program.
Yeah, it is fairly unique. It was modeled a little bit after, I think, a similar program in Blackstone Valley, right?
Yes.
If my memory
Yeah.
serves me correctly. Michael Creasy, who was the superintendent of the national park
Right,
in
and we will
29.
be interviewing him.
Yes,
Yes.
in 2009. He had been in Blackstone Valley National
Okay.
Park. And so I think a similar kind of program was starting there as well.
Okay.
So he had some of
Great.
it was sort of based on that. But at this point it's evolved quite a bit.
Right.
And every year it's kind of different because we ask the cohort members, what are things that are of interest to you?
Right.
And so we do customize some of the sessions so that we're really making sure that it's applicable to what
Right.
are the concerns of our of the
Right.
current cohort. But the national park is still a key player in that. We have a liaison from the park every year that works
Right.
with us. And several of our sessions are done with the park specifically, so that's really a critical
Right.
piece.
Right.
And I did want to note that we're actually this year launching a new sort of piece of the program, which is a collaboration with the university so that
Wow,
participants can earn 3 credits in the Master's in Public Administration program.
Wow, that's awesome.
So that's, we're really excited about that. It's a nice, sort of incentive as well,
Right.
but also a great way to get people to think about how they might utilize their experience in the program.
Right, right.
So.
And what better way to learn about public
Yes.
administration
Right.
than to participate
Right,
in a
right,
great program
right.
like
Yeah,
that?
yeah. And we've had some great alumni.
Tell us about them
Tom-
in addition to yourself.
Yeah, so the current city manager, Tom Golden,
Yeah.
was in the inaugural class in 2009.
That's great.
State Representative Vanna Howard was in, I think, 2013. I say the dates because they're always very big on like who was the best
Good
class.
best class,
Right, right.
yes.
But some nonprofit leaders, Joe Hungler from
Yes.
the Boys and Girls Club, Yunju Choi from the Coalition for a Better Acre, they were
CBA.
also in the program.
Right.
Sarah Kuhn Lang, who's now at the university,
Yeah.
but had formerly been at Congresswoman Lori Trahan's office. So
Yeah.
we have some great, and there's so many
Right,
more I
right.
could name, but
Yeah.
some really great leaders in Lowell that,
Right.
went through the program, have really stayed in Lowell and made some amazing contributions to the city.
Wow. I know that's a good program to learn about.
It is. So one of the things that we're hoping is to give this message, as I mentioned, to the next generation, that it is possible to do well and do good. And we wonder if you have any advice for the next generation. You've already shared a lot of insight just by describing your own commitment and dedication to this great community. You've both been unbelievable leaders, and we thank you for that. And if you could just give a little thought, if you were sitting in front of the next class here, what would you say?
I think my first word would be, what's important is collaboration.
Oh gosh.
I mean,
I literally was about to say that too. Like, no joke.
And basically, I mean, everything that we talked about, whether it's the LDFC or the Lowell plan, it's always been done in collaboration with the local administration, with the educational facilities, and other nonprofits. You just can't do anything alone.
Right.
And in this way, everybody has, like you said, everybody has different ways of getting there. But if you put it all together, so that would be the one thing is you have to be willing to collaborate.
Yeah.
And work with other people.
Well said.
Yeah, I mean, no joke. You definitely stole my word too. I mean, I think that's why Lowell has been as successful as it has been. And I would add that really was evident during the pandemic. In that I mean, Germaine and I both participated on a number of sort of task force and working groups early on at the start of the shutdown, and particularly in response to the needs of the small business community. And we worked with the Chamber of Commerce, the City of Lowell, E4All, and the Entrepreneurship Center at CTI. Yeah. But the reason we could come together so quickly is because we already had these really established relationships. And so it was just like second nature. Of course, we're not going to just do it ourselves. Of course, we're going to call the chamber and the city and others. Like, it would just be, it's just a natural fit, right? So we could really react to what the needs are of the business community because we already had a lot of local contacts and that just that sense of partnership, right out of the gate.
Right.
And what does it feel like? Again, this next generation, they're very eager to make a difference. So I guess from what you've said, you feel it is possible.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think
to make a difference in a city like Lowell.
Right. And it doesn't have to be because you ran for public office, right? Or because you sit as the executive of a nonprofit. There's a lot of ways to be involved. I think of groups like the Lowell Litter Crew, which is a really almost entirely volunteer-based group that just shows up on Saturdays and cleans neighborhoods.
Could you say that again? Just at Lowell Litter
Crew.
So that,
And in fact, their founder just completed Public Matters 2 years ago. Okay. But it's just a great example of individuals that said, look, there's a need. There's we need to think about how to keep our neighborhoods cleaner, and they do. They just post on social media. We're going to be here this Saturday. Anyone who can show up. And it's things like that that really make a difference. It doesn't have to be, your full-time job. It can be ways that you can get engaged that are really have an impact on the community.
Right.
The one other question that Marie, I think you would just love their building and where they are.
Oh,
and so I think one of the things that was really important for the city is the breadth of nonprofits that we have here. And many of the nonprofits, as we were going through that urban revitalization, provided kind of an anchor tenancy, if you will, in some projects that were nascent projects people weren't sure of. And certainly LDFC and Lowell Plan. In the building that you're in, it's a gorgeous, one of the old mill buildings that was resurrected. It's a big part of what the city's brand is now. So tell us what it's like being in that building, how long you've been there. And
we love that building. We're in the one Lancet Mills, right near the Songus Arena and along the canal. When we go out to lunch and walk back, we every time. We're like, we work in such a beautiful space because we're
Across
right
the
on the
canal,
water.
I know it is.
Yeah.
So tell us about your walk to lunch, because that is such a beautiful part of the city.
Yeah.
It's
And
really
it is the story. It was
Right.
the opening up of the canals.
Yes, right.
And
Yep.
also those buildings.
Yeah, and even
So-
the Riverwalk is right behind us, so we can, really get anywhere from there as well. And behind some of the university properties and the boot mills and some
Right.
of those spaces. But yeah, it's a great sort of connector. Those canals serve as a great connector in the community, and the walkways there are beautiful. We've been there, I think, 11 years, and prior to that, we were in 2 different buildings on Merrimack Street over the years.
Right.
And the same, it's we think it's critical to be located in the downtown and in some of these buildings that we ourselves are working hard to make sure are restored and and kept as important economic development drivers for Lowell. So yeah, we love it there.
Well done. Any other closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to share that we didn't get to today?
And any projects just on the hopper right now that we can keep on our radar?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you one from each that I can think of.
Yeah.
So on the Lowell Plan side, we are actually offering a program in collaboration with the Greater Lowell Community Foundation. They have funded a new initiative that is sort of a bit of a spin-off from Public Matters that we're doing with the Chamber and the Coalition for Better Acre and Lowell Alliance. So those are other nonprofit organizations, and it's meant to support boards of nonprofits that want to create more diverse and inclusive membership, and at the same time support those individuals that are Public Matters graduates or participants in some of those other programs I mentioned that are looking to get involved but don't know what are my responsibilities as a board member, or may not have that network to even be asked. And so it's a training program that will support both sides of that issue, and the Community Foundation has provided us a very generous grant to launch that program.
Right. That's great.
And then on the LDFC side, we, Germaine talked a lot about pools that we create in response to needs in the community, and we're launching a new historic preservation pool that will be modeled similarly to the loan fund you mentioned earlier that the National Park Service got. And it's really meant to support the facade improvements of our downtown historic buildings.
Wonderful.
Many of them were restored in the
Right.
80s and
Right.
90s, but have seen some wear and tear
Right.
since then.
Right.
And so this is a way to, again, offer a lower interest loan. It's done a collaboration of the lending institutions in Lowell are contributing to it that we can then use to offer developers that are looking to make improvements on their buildings. And many of the interiors of these buildings have high needs, elevators or sprinkler systems, which are very costly.
Right.
And we don't want the facades to be put on the back burner. And so this is a way to help incentivize that and make sure that those pieces really get done as well.
Right. Excellent. So yeah, just always, again, that sense of continuously working
Right.
on projects, that it's never done. Like, okay,
Right.
we
Yeah,
did it in the 70s
right.
and 80s, we
Right.
don't need to do these things
Yeah.
anymore. So that's another way for the younger generation to say, okay, now it's our turn.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Well, thank you very much
Yes.
for being
Well,
with us
yeah,
today
thank
and
you for
sharing
asking.
your
Thank you for having us.
insights.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah, thank you very
And-
much for inviting us. This has been nice.
And also for your great leadership in the community. We're very grateful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.